Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Game, Develop, Repeat. I am your host, Chris, and today we're going in on turn-based combat. I have been very interested in this idea of how to make turn-based combat interesting, and I want to talk about this sort of like spectrum that I've noticed in turn-based combat. It's the spectrum of action within turn-based. I don't know how else to put that. The spectrum of time pressure, maybe, of skill. There's this interesting range from like a game like Final Fantasy VIII where you click a button at the right time for one particular character and it lets you do a little bit of extra damage and you have like some limit breaks that are time sensitive, all the way over to full on action games and everything in between. So I want to talk about that. I want to kind of very loosely analyze that concept throughout this episode. So we'll talk about a bunch of different games. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking we talk about pure turn-based versus ATB versus something like Final Fantasy VIII or like Yakuza Like a Dragon, where you have perfect timing blocks, versus something like Legend of Dragoon. Legend of the Dragoon. Even to this day, I cannot remember it. If you've listened to my first episode, then you know what I'm talking about there. So we're going to dive in on this. Forgive me if my voice is a little bit of a mess. I've been sick for a week straight, literally since the last episode that I recorded. I finished that episode feeling kind of sick and then was very, very sick the next day and have since recovered pretty well. But for that reason, I am going to try to keep this episode a bit brief and a little looser maybe than usual. But hopefully we'll still be able to cover some very interesting topics and learn quite a lot from these games. Let's get after it. So we're going to talk about several different games, and I'm going to try to go one at a time to keep this fairly structured. The first thing I want to talk about is purely turn-based combat. I love purely turn-based combat. I like a good rock-solid foundation where every decision that you make is its impacts are very clear. You might have picked up on this about me recently or just through listening to this podcast, but I love when a game has decisions that have clear impacts and no questions about what that impact is, because then it's much easier to strategize. You make a decision, it's very obvious what happens as a result of your decision. You see clear, strong consequences, and you go, oh, okay. And you might go, wow, I shouldn't have done that, or oh, I'm really glad I did that. It's a strong learning environment. It's an environment where you can learn how to play the game very quickly. I like turn-based combat because it does this. Really solid turn-based combat, you make a decision, and if you screwed up, you know real quickly, right? You're like, oh, yep, nope, that was a bad move. That was not a good move. In the far action end of the spectrum, you don't have as much of that, right? You can make tons of tiny mistakes because you can't expect everybody to play perfectly in an action setting because they're under time pressure. Now, in a turn-based combat system like Final Fantasy X, you can see what turns are coming out next. You can see what impact your turn is going to have on the turn order. And you can see, oh, I need to hurry up and do this thing because that enemy is coming up next and they may attack this person. And like, uh-oh, like maybe I need to cure, maybe I need to defend. You can predict a little bit, which is nice. Now, as soon as you start putting more of an action element into that, as soon as you go to the ATB system, is it active time battle? Is that what that stands for? When you go to that system, then it's a little less clear and like maybe the turn order is not displayed on the screen. Maybe you don't know exactly what is happening next. And so you can't quite be as strategic because it's a little bit more, there's time pressure. It's a little bit more mysterious. It's a little bit less obvious what is going to happen from turn to turn. And I think it being obvious what's going to happen from turn to turn is actually quite important when you're doing a turn-based combat. Because if you know who's next, you can make rough predictions about what they're going to do. If you have no idea who's going next, if you don't know what the next 5 turns look like, it's harder to strategize, right? So I think that information is nice. Now, I lean heavily on pure turn-based combat. I don't want there to be a timer between characters. I want it to be like I can sit here for hours and just decide what to do next. I like that. Not for all my games, but for my turn-based combat, I like it to be turn-based combat, but I don't like it to just be menu navigation. This is where we get into the juice. This is where we get into the good stuff. I like a game that has a little spice on top. I like a game that has a little bit of skill thrown on top. You know this. If you listen to the very first episode of this podcast, you know why I'm obsessed with The Legend of Dragoon, and it's all about the action within the turn-based combat system. It's a turn-based combat system that has some responsive, some skill-based stuff, I should say. It has moments where you got to click the right button at exactly the right time. And I feel like that is just sprinkled atop this beautiful turn-based system. They're just like, oh, by the way, you have to pay attention after you already clicked the button. You don't just click the button. You can't just autopilot, hold down, attack. You have to be active while you're attacking. Final Fantasy VIII does this. It doesn't do it very heavily. It is a single grain of salt rather than a sprinkling of salt, right? It does not add much flavor to the combat. It's just, oh, your main character has a gunblade, and when he attacks, if you click this button at the right time, it'll do a little bit more damage. Woohoo. I am not excited about that. I'm excited about the concept, though. That is not enough to keep me enticed, but the idea that you have to pay attention to what's happening on the field and click something at the right time is beautiful. Next game that does something like that, Yakuza Like a Dragon, which I am currently playing and obsessed with, and I wanted to do an entire episode about Yakuza Like a Dragon, and then I realized that I don't have that episode in me right now for two reasons. One, recovering from being sick. Two, and this is maybe the bigger one, I don't know how to talk about that game without spoiling things, and I refuse to spoil the story of that game. My absolute favorite part of that game is the story, and I can't spoil that for you. If you have any interest in that game, you got to play it because the story is hilarious and ridiculous and such a friggin' soap opera. It's so absurd. It's so over the top. But anyway, the combat in Yakuza Like a Dragon is very much turn-based combat, but there are a couple elements sprinkled on top that make it a little more active and more exciting. It is not Legend of the Dragoon level for me, but it is pretty good. It's pretty far along this spectrum. So it's got let's call it three things. One, certain abilities have reactive button prompts that you click in order to improve the amount of damage that you are doing. So you have to rapidly tap X or hit Y at the right time or what have you in order to do more damage or improve the chances of the ability succeeding or whatever. Pretty cool. I think it's strictly more damage. Maybe there's some ability out there that's like a higher chance of a status effect or something, but it seems like it's strictly more damage. Excuse me, I feel like I'm about to cough, and I'm really trying not to. So there's that element to it, and then there's also this element of when an enemy attacks you, you can press B at exactly the right time to do a perfect guard and decrease the amount of damage that they're doing. So now you're paying attention to enemy attack timings, you're paying attention to your own attack timings, and you feel like you have an impact on how well your characters execute their attacks. Love it. That is a nice thing to sprinkle on top of a strategic turn-based combat system. The last bit that it adds on top, and I think it's easy to underestimate this, but it's quite nice, is movement. It's got this thing, and there's tricks to this, and there's elements of this that bother me because it's not something you can really tightly control for. It's kind of a random chance thing. Your enemies are moving around the field as you're playing, right? They're kind of moving wherever they're going to move. And you have certain abilities that do area of effect stuff, and you can do kind of there's some that attack in a cone. So you can pick who you attack to make sure that you're hitting multiple people. Or you can focus on targeting down specific people. And it's a nice feature. It's a little bit too uncontrollable for me, and it's a little too hard to approximate who you're going to hit with attacks. But I still like it. I prefer the Chrono Trigger version of this because it's much easier to see the impact that you're going to have, and the random movement is a little bit more predictable, I guess. Chrono Trigger has the same movement thing going on with its combat. So I I appreciate that bit of spice too. I think it's a nice little addition, but I think if you really try to min-max it, it could make the game annoying to play. I don't think people do that though. I hope nobody does that, because it seems like such a weird thing to min-max that I just don't think anybody just like sits there and waits forever for people to get into the right position. Oh, and there's also, if you hit somebody while they're already down on the ground, you can do extra damage. That's pretty cool. It just adds a little something to it. So that's a version of turn-based combat that I'm really pretty impressed by how much they're doing with it. They're adding all of this spice on top. They're going, yeah, it's turn-based. You can see who goes next. You can't see the whole list of like all the turn order, but you see who goes next, and I appreciate it. And you can see, you can, what am I trying to say here? You can add a little bit of skill on top of it. So it's still very turn-based, but you get to throw just a little dash of skill on top of everything. So what we're seeing here is this like spectrum of turn-based and then these seasonings that you can throw on top of it, I guess. So there's this range from fully turn-based to action-based to much more action-based. Sorry, how should I phrase this? There's fully turn-based, there's like ATB system, right? And then we're moving along the spectrum into just full-on active battling. Somewhere in that area between ATB and active is like MMO combat, right? We're like, yeah, it's active, but everything's on timers and, So we've got that spectrum, and then we've got skill-based stuff on top of that spectrum, right? We've got all of these different things where we can sprinkle skill on top of it. So within the MMO, there's like the skill of moving around and avoiding things. Like this is more active combat in multiple different ways. Or you've got the boring MMO where you can't dodge at all. Sorry, fans of this particular thing. But you've got this version where the combat itself, not the game, but the combat itself is kind of boring. You can't dodge. It's just a matter of hitting the right thing at the right time. It's sort of weirdly turn-based. And then going down the spectrum towards a much more like turn-based, locked-in, you can chill all day kind of a game, almost turning into a puzzle game at times, where you've got very strategic, but you can add skill on top of it. And this is the spot for me that is exciting. A extremely turn-based game that borders on being a puzzle sometimes for like major boss fights, that has a skill-based system on top of it. That is a fundamental, that's a beautiful foundation with great frosting on top to me, right? And then you've got the other end, which is like highly action-based, extremely skill-focused stuff. I'm not sure how much variety I can think of in this moment for an extremely action-based game. Maybe the variety comes in your character's build. So the strategy element of it is the stuff that you can do while you're not in the combat, while you're not in this pure skill environment, and you choose your guns and you choose your build and all this stuff. And then it turns into something where you don't have to think about strategy whatsoever while you're actually in combat, right? Let's talk more about these levers that we can play with, these dials that we can play with. And maybe I'll design a little bit here. Maybe I'll design my ideal turn-based combat system. So we've established that I love turn-based combat with a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of frosting on top. I like that core strategic gameplay with the element of skill placed on top of it. What does this actually end up looking like in terms of game design? How does this look like in terms of balancing encounters? What does this imply? Does the player have to be great at the skill side of this combat, or can the player focus purely on being strategic and ignore the skill side? Do I want a game that is fully accessible to somebody who wants to go strategy mode and ignore the skill side? Is there some accessibility feature that I add where you automatically succeed at all the skill checks? Or does this make the game too, I don't know, too easy? Sometimes people just play a game for story. Who cares if it's too easy? Give them the accessibility feature, tuck it away in a menu, and say, hey, if you want it to be easy, here you go. Here's your button for story mode. No problem. Have at. Enjoy. So what is this balance? What do I want? Think I think ultimately, if I'm the one making the game, what do I want? Um, I think that's fair to ask because I'm making it, right? So I get to choose, right? It feels weird to be like, yeah, it's up to me, but it is. It's up to me. So why am I making this? What do I want from it? Um, I definitely want some level of strategy in the combat. I don't want it to be purely skill. I don't want every battle to be, did you click the button at the right time? Yes, no? Okay, cool. Well, then you win or you lose based on just that one feature. I want the strategy to have an impact. I don't want a heavy equipment-based strategy thing. Like we were just talking about equipping gear being an essential part of maybe like a more action-based RPG, right? I don't really like going through gear menus. I get annoyed. I get, this might be an unpopular opinion. Here's a rare spicy take. It's not even spicy. It's just me having an opinion. I don't like gear. I just don't like it. I don't like equipping a different helmet. I don't like equipping new armor. I don't like accessories. I find it so annoying. I just feel like they can be so pivotal for the game. It can be like, oh, you're wearing the wrong accessory, so you just can't beat this boss, right? And I'm like, why do I have to go into my characters are supposed to just know that, oh, I have to wear this ribbon. If I don't wear this ribbon, I'm never going to be able to beat this boss. How do they know that? How are they preparing for that in advance? Like, if I can't go up against a boss and theoretically be able to beat the boss the first time around, there better be a reason, man. Like, I think you should be able to theoretically, like, that's not it. It's okay for a boss to be impossible the first time around. That's fine. Even theoretically. But there's something about, oh, you have to equip the right thing in order to be able to beat this boss that drives me insane. It doesn't make sense to me. I look at it and I'm like, okay, so who in the game told my character that they have to wear that gear? How was I supposed to figure that out, right? Like who leading up to this battle was like, oh, you're about to fight this person and you really need to make sure to wear this particular piece of gear because he has this ability that is going to be affected by it. Like, I also just don't trust what gear says in games a lot of the time. Like something like, oh, this prevents sleep. And I'm like, does it? Or does it only prevent sleep most of the time? And then because of this one boss's special thing where their mechanic is all about sleep, you always fall asleep, even if you're wearing this gear. Like, I don't trust the equipment to do what it says it's going to do because there have just been too many instances where I cast a spell on a boss that is supposed to do a thing, and then they're like, oh, no, the boss is immune. I'm like, okay. It's an annoying mechanic. It's inconsistent. It's unclear. It's everything that I don't like about a mechanic. I want to know what is going to happen. I want it to be predictable. I want it to be easy to learn. I want to go in there and I want to click the button and I want to know what's going to happen when I click the button. I don't want to know these weird unseen rules. I don't want to have to know that bosses just don't get affected by silence, right? I don't want to have to figure out which boss is going to be affected by what. It's like this thing where you're playing an ARPG and it looks like you're hitting the enemy, but you're missing because they have a high defense stat. And you're like, why am I missing? I'm clearly hitting, but you're not, right? That sort of thing drives me crazy. And I recognize that this is a design trick and like it's a thing that we use and I'll probably use it at some point. I get it. But I don't like it. I don't like it. I just don't like it. I've gone off on a tangent. I recognize that, but that's kind of why equipment bothers me. So I don't really want to rely on equipment for strategy. I want to rely on moment-to-moment choices for strategy because it's easier to think about for me. It's easier to learn the logic behind it if I see the impact of my choices right in front of my face. I don't see the impact of my equipment as immediately or as consciously as I see the impact of choosing to defend instead of attack, choosing to attack instead of defend. I see the impact very quickly. All right. Or like, oh, I used frost on this thing and it did extra damage. I know that now. It's ingrained in my memory. I'm not thinking about what I equipped 20 minutes ago. So anyway, in terms of designing turn-based combat, I think reliance on equipment is really frustrating for me personally. I think it may just be a pet peeve thing. I think that putting a layer of skill on top of things is really nice, partially because it pulls me into the combat even more and makes me more attentive to things. If I put all this effort into my skill and it's still doing like 2 damage, then I'm like, oh, I'm clearly using the wrong ability right now. Like I'm definitely doing something wrong, right? Although maybe it could be a distraction. That's an interesting thought. That's an interesting path to go down too. Like the skill stuff could distract you from noticing whether or not you're being efficient because you're too busy focusing on just like hitting the right button at the right time, right? Regardless, I like a good, oh, maybe you could make the skill just get stopped every time. Like maybe if somebody has a resistance to a skill, you don't get the chance to do the extra damage stuff. Like it's like, nope. You can't get away with that because I'm too good at dodging that. Or like I have a shield, so you can't use a sword in that way. Or something interesting like that. I think there's value in that idea. I'm not sure. I think that could be hard to. Everything's hard to implement. I think that could be interesting. I think there's something interesting in there. What am I getting at? I'm going down all these rabbit holes because I'm all over the place. What I'm getting at is my ideal turn-based strategy combat is truly turn-based. You can see the progression of the turns, and you can see how your actions affect that progression. You can't necessarily see what your enemy's next move is. I'm not all about that. I mean, maybe if the combat's very difficult, that could be nice, but I don't really think so. I don't think that's my move. But you can see who goes next. And then on top of the attacks that you use, there is I'm going to go with a distinctive skill for each attack that you're using. Like you will have, there's distinct timing. There's some charm behind each attack that you're using. There's something about each attack that is specific to that attack that you have to do just right. And maybe it's this like mini game structure, right? Like maybe it's something like Undertale, which is, excuse me, I'm hiccuping, which is a masterpiece in so many ways. But maybe it's something like Undertale where you have this interesting like mini game that you have to play within each battle. Or maybe it's just something like Legend of the Dragoon where it's all about timing and it's just well animated and there's just different timing going on. Or maybe we got something where it's like a dragon where you've got X is kind of a rapid click attack thing and then Y is a careful timing heavy hitting attack thing. I like all of these systems. I think they all have their own charm to them, and I can't pick the perfect style. But for me, what I'm invested in is minimal equipment, maximum skill on top of a pure turn-based system. And I do think for the way that I am, I want it to be punishing if you screw up. I want it to be like, oh, you didn't hit your combo, your timing based combo. You are in serious danger now. You have made a mistake, you're in trouble, and now you have to compensate for that mistake. Because I think that is a way to make each battle more exciting. And that is something I struggle with in JRPGs, is individual battles aren't often very exciting. I want the individual battles to be exciting, man. I'm so tired of just grinding. I want like a 20-hour JRPG where every single battle feels hard. And if you want to restrict my experience, do it. If you want to say you cannot grind in this game, it is impossible to grind. You have exactly this. If you want to make it crazy linear and just say you're stuck in on this super linear game and everything is really just like individual battles that you have to master, fine. Let's go. I want to try that. I want to play that game. I want to experience that game. If you know of that game, send me that game. Tell me what that game is. I want to play it. I want to see if I like it. I want to find out because that seems interesting to me. And I think it's easy to get roped into this like open world, exploring this interesting stuff, exploring all this cool stuff. Okay, cool. All right, fine. What if we just do a turn-based RPG that is super, super linear? Is this Undertale? No, I don't think so. But what if we just do a turn-based RPG that is super, super linear with no real grind system, right? And an extremely tight skill-based combat system. I need to wrap up this episode. I'm overdoing it. I'm probably going to regret this. It's going to destroy my throat. So I need to wrap up this episode. Let's go ahead and just like bring things to a close here. Okay, I've got 3 questions for you this week. Question number 1. What do you love about your favorite games? Pretty straightforward, right? That's kind of what this entire podcast is me answering that question. Second question, what do you ignore about your favorite games? This is inspired by me going off on that rant about equipment. For all the games that I love, I always ignore the equipment because I don't like it. I'm just not interested in it. I didn't realize how much I don't like it until I started rambling about it, but I ignore it because I don't like it, right? And then, what are your game design pet peeves? What are things you see in game design that drive you crazy? For me, it is the block of text thing. It is the I just started playing this game and you're making me read 3 paragraphs about how to jump and swing my sword, and I can't stand it. I'm like, teach me that any other way. Don't give me 3 paragraphs to tell me to click A. Just give me a little button prompt that pops up that says A and then makes me go, oh, I wonder what happens if I click A, right? Please, for the love of God, don't give me a block of text. That's maybe my biggest game design pet peeve. And the tip for this week is to escape the internet's opinion. It's easy to be on the internet a lot, to look at everything. I'm thinking of this because I've been locked in my room for a week with COVID. It's easy to look at stuff on the internet and be like, oh, everybody thinks this, everybody thinks that, no. It's not one giant opinion. It's a million different people thinking their own things. Get into small communities. Have your own little group of people whose opinions you care about, and learn from the things that you think are quality. Learn from what you care about. Don't worry about the full internet's opinion. If 5% of people are like, yeah, I like what you're doing, then you're in a great spot, right? Like if you have like a little tiny little community of people that are like, yeah, this is dope, then you've got people you can connect with and you've got cool stuff to talk about, and you don't have to worry about what Joe Schmo who loves skateboarding thinks about your JRPG opinion, because you're not talking about skateboarding. You're talking about JRPGs. And by the way, skateboarding is sick. That stuff is cool. But, skateboarders hang out in the skateboarding community. Game designers hang out in the game design community. You can cross paths all you want, but you don't need to please everybody all the time, right? Like, don't worry about the internet's opinion. Do your thing. Have fun with it. Enjoy it, right? I'm out of energy. That's the end of the podcast this week. Thank you all for joining me. For anybody who's new here, thank you for stopping by. I hope you stick around. I've got Let's see, what do I have to self-promo stuff? My game is out. It's got 8 reviews. If it hits 10 reviews, that's going to be amazing. We'll see if that happens. It may take like another year. It may take some time, right? But if it gets 2 more reviews, I'm going to go mad. I'm going to be hyped. That'll be wild. Because that's like a threshold in Steam. It's like a whole important thing. And then I got this podcast. So check out, keep listening to this podcast. Thank you so much. And I will see you in the next one. I'll have a little more energy next week. I doubt that I will be sick again, right? That's everything. Have a good week. Have fun with it. Make some stuff. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.